So it's here, Superman, the first movie in the new DCU. You know, this film had to accomplish a lot. And I'm not talking about how it had to sell people on this new DC cinematic universe. I mean, it had to do that too, but first it had the bigger and more important job of selling people on Superman as a character. And on the face of it, that mightn't sound like too big of a task. But think about it for a minute. Before this Superman movie, we had two other solo Superman films which failed to get Superman over with general audiences. Superman Returns with Brendan Routh in 2006, I stand by it, it's a great Superman film. But as much as I love it, I can see why it didn't exactly set the world on fire. Man of Steel, the second attempt at reigniting the Superman brand, rolls around 6 years later. And man, depending on who you ask, it's either the best Superman film ever made, an untouchable masterpiece handed down to us on high from the prophet, Lord and Savior Zack Snyder, or it's the worst Superman film ever made by a guy who fundamentally doesn't understand a single thing about what makes Superman work as a character. Needless to say, this new Superman film had to contend with a lot of baggage. You had the angry Snyder cultists who were determined to hate it. I mean, to be fair, they hate everything, so it didn't really matter what they thought. And you had just the regular normies who liked Henry Cavill as Superman and were kind of pissed that he wasn't playing the character anymore. On top of that, this film had to get people excited for DC on film again. No easy task after the last decade of DC releases proved to be more miss than hit. And on top of that, this Superman film was also the first film in a new DC cinematic universe. It was going to set the table for what was to come. So yeah, the odds were very much stacked against Gunn on this one. James Gunn's Superman accomplishes what Zack Snyder's Man of Steel didn't. It sells people on the character of Superman, and more importantly, it sells people on the concept of Superman. And James Gunn accomplishes this very simply. He took the complete opposite approach that David Goyer, and to a lesser extent Christopher Nolan, did with Man of Steel. Gunn embraced the core aspects of Superman's character. You see, all that stuff that was thrown out in Man of Steel and BVS in relation to Superman's characterization, his humanity, his honesty, his aw shucks optimism. It turns out you actually need all that stuff for people to connect with Superman. As it happens, that's the stuff that people actually respond to when it comes to the character of Superman. Current Sweat Superman and Clark Kent feel different from any of the other previous live-action portrayals while still staying true to the typical characterization. Current Sweat Superman has the unashamed optimism, wholesomeness, and hopefulness of Christopher Reeve's Superman in spades, mixed with John Byrne's less bumbling, more down-to-earth everyman Clark Kent from the Man of Steel comics of the 1980s. And it works. Clark feels really relatable as a character here. Gunn leans into the Boy Scout angle, leans into the earnestness, and makes it impossible not to like this guy. He might have the powers of a god, but he feels like a regular guy just trying to do the right thing. Gunn 100% understands the assignment when it comes to the characterization of Superman and also Clark Kent. He understands that behind the cape and the trunks, Superman is just a farm boy from Kansas who does good things for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. If you want to make a good Superman film, hell, if you want to make a good Superman anything, you need to understand this about the character first. Every version of Superman that has ever worked in either live action or animation understood this. Here, Superman will go out of his way to save a rampaging kaiju monster and also a squirrel, because he considers both to be equally as important. And this, getting the characterization right, was the most important thing for me that this film had to accomplish. Everything else about this film could have been awful, but I wouldn't have minded so long as Gunn just got the character right. And I had my doubts. When I first heard that Gunn was going to be writing and directing, I was worried. I wasn't sure Gunn was the right guy to really capture the innate earnestness of Superman as a character. Gunn usually prefers writing more outright damaged or broken characters. But man, I'm happy to say I was wrong. Gunn's got a handle on Superman in the same way that all the other great Superman writers have. Another thing that Gunn does a really good job with is the relationship stuff in this film. There's a strong emphasis on connection here, with Clark and his family and with Clark and Lois. And this was a pretty smart move on Gunn's behalf. He uses the relationships to really sell the idea that Clark, behind all the powers, is just a regular guy who loves his parents and is trying really hard to make it work with the woman he loves, Lois Lane. The scene where Clark surprises Lois on their anniversary feels really authentic. It begins really light-hearted, but once Lois broaches the subject of actually interviewing Clark as Superman, you can feel a shift in tone. And as the interview becomes more confrontational, Clark becomes more and more defensive. leading to an argument. The way the scene gradually escalates from light-hearted bantering to an outright argument, where at the end, Lois actually questions if the relationship can work at all, feels really realistic, more so than I've seen in a lot of actual dramas. It's probably one of the strongest scenes in the film, and it's just two people talking in an apartment. The way these two interact with each other, the way their relationship is portrayed, it reminds me a lot of how Clark and Lois's relationship was portrayed on the CW Superman and Lois TV show. There, their relationship felt really grounded and realistic too, in the same way as it does here. Clark and Lois felt like a real-life married couple who were bringing up two kids, and who had to deal with all the problems that come along with that. With Corrin Sweat's Clark Kent and Brosnahan's Lois Lane, you get the impression that they're just regular people having realistic relationship issues. It doesn't matter that one of them is an alien from another planet. Man, I'm so glad that Gunn kept Ma and Pa Kent alive in this version. Don't get me wrong, Pa Kent dying in the original Donner Superman film hit like a train for me, but I always loved that in the comics, that Clark could just go back to Kansas and talk with Ma and Pa Kent whenever things became too much. This was one of the things I love so much about Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman TV series. The Kents were front and center in that show, always there to give Clark a helping hand or advice when he needed it most. Clark might be basically a god, but he still relies on his parents for emotional and moral support. Probably my favorite scene in this film is when Clark wakes up after recovering from kryptonite poisoning and he just sits on the porch with Pa Kent, telling him about how lost he feels. It just feels like a really heartfelt, genuine, cathartic moment shared by a father and son. And it's not just the bigger, more heartfelt moments that showcase the Kent's good nature. It's the small things that hit so hard and make them feel like real people. Like how Ma Kent doesn't know how to use a cell phone properly. And for some reason, this line from Ma Kent hits me in the gut every time. I just can't explain it.
I cleaned your boots. I'll go get them for you.
When you see the Kents, and when you see the kind of person that Clark is, you understand right away why Clark is the way he is, where he gets it from, why he's such a good person. You don't need to show Superman's origin in every film or show him growing up in Smallville. It's not necessary, but it is very necessary to showcase Ma and Pa Kent and their impact on Clark's life and how they influence his development, especially when you're establishing a new, younger version of the character. The Kents are integral for making Clark into Superman. So much of what makes Superman Superman comes from them. About 99% of it, actually. Funnily enough, it was the appearance of Kevin Costner's Pa Kent in that second Man of Steel trailer that got me really worried about the direction Zack was taking that Superman film in. When you have Pa Kent, typically portrayed as a kindly old farmer, advocating for why a young Clark should have left a school bus of children to drown, you know shit's gone seriously wrong somewhere. In contrast, this line from Pa Kent in the second trailer for this Superman film reassured me that Gunn was 100% on the right track with what he was doing. The Kents might be secondary characters, but if you get them wrong, then you're probably going to get Superman wrong too. I was a bit nervous about the direction that Gunn was going in when I started seeing the announcement that this film was also going to have Guy Gardner, Metamorpho, Hawkgirl, and Mr. Terrific, but these characters are introduced organically here. Superheroes shoehorned into a project just to set up a spin-off series or another series of movies can often be really clunkily handled. Unlike, say, Wonder Woman's appearance in BVS, the Justice Gang has enough of a role in this story that their inclusion feels warranted. These characters play a role. Except for Hawkgirl, they aren't just walk-on parts. Mr. Terrific gets probably the best action scene in this film, and his contribution to finding Clark when he's imprisoned in the pocket dimension moves the story along in a believable, organic way. Guy Gardner's conversations with Clark, and later his conversation about Clark with Lois, has weight to it. You believe Guy has a shared history with Superman and has a begrudging respect for him. And these interactions are important because while Guy doesn't do much proactively in the story, his presence serves a different purpose in this film. How Guy bounces off Superman and the other heroes around him, how he banters with his teammates, his allusions to previous missions, all of it makes me believe that these characters have been knocking around in this universe for a while. Gunn didn't just want to drop viewers into this newly birthed universe. He wanted the universe to already have a sense of history to it. He wanted it to feel lived in, and small conversational cues hinting at past missions and teammates casually banting with each other like old friends gives this universe that sense of history in a believable way. It's subtle world building, but often that's the most effective way to build a world, not by recounting past events in a big monologue. Sometimes just small character actions can say a lot about a world and its history. Man, I love that I'm seeing so much goodwill towards Mr. Terrific, a character I've always had a lot of time for since Jeff Johns' JSA run. He gets such a big push here. I've seen so many reviews where Mr. Terrific's being lauded as the breakout character and steals every scene he's in. And yeah, he 100% does. Eddie Gathegi has such a deadpan comedic sense of timing, man. Rare that a secondary character can leave such an impression that I'd want to see them get their own full-fledged spin-off, but Mr. Terrific feels like such a strong character here that I feel he should get a spin-off, or at least a bigger role in another Gunn project. I have to admit, I'm still a little bit salty about Nathan Fillion being cast as Guy Gardner of all the Green Lanterns. After years of fan casting this guy as Hal Jordan, only for him to then slowly age out of the role as WB left the Green Lantern property stagnate, only to then cast Kyle Chandler, an actor who is actually 5 years older than Fillion as Hal in Lanterns, feels like such a missed opportunity. But I have to say, Fillion's Guy works. He kills it actually. Guy's a tough character to make work too, man. In the comics he's kind of an asshole, but you know, a likable asshole. From a character perspective, making Guy work can be a narrow line to straddle. Lean too much into him being an asshole and people are going to get turned off, but Fillion brings the right amount of asshole and likability to the role and makes it work. Just please stick him in his classic duds in the next film. I know the Justice Gang are wearing basically corporate mandated issue costumes. Come on man, what is this fake? The classic Guy Gardner look is great, just go with that. And maybe stick Eddie Gathegi in that other comic costume too, because this dude got yoked for this role and you can't even tell with this fit. Those guns out, man, Jesus. So, Lex Luthor played by Nicholas Hoult was probably the biggest concern I had going into this film. And I'm sad to say, for me, he was far and away the weakest part of it. That's no knock on Nicholas Hoult as an actor either. It's just the characterization. I don't vibe with it. Coming off the back of Superman and Lois, where we had the best interpretation of Lex Luthor probably ever, Michael Cudliss's portrayal underlined the menace of Lex Luthor, the barely concealed rage, the confidence, the intelligence, the cool and collected demeanor. Holt's Lex has shades of the cool and collected demeanor and the confidence at times. Where's the other stuff? It's unfair to use Michael Cudliss's Lex to contrast Holt's portrayal. They're two very different takes on the character, but Lex on Superman and Lois felt like he commanded any room he was in. He had this threatening air about him without ever having to say a word. And he had that presence, you know? But that presence, that's just not something Gunn included in this characterization. And that's a real shame, man, because Lex is a way more interesting character when he has that sense of menace to him. And what's kind of frustrating is that we get flashes of that typical Lex persona, scenes that paint Holt's Lex as this calculating, intelligent, and cool villain. But then we also get scenes that undermine him and paint him in an almost incompetent light. Take for example when Superman blows into Lex's office screaming and Lex casually removes his coffee cup from his desk a second before Superman blasts it across the room. It's a small thing, but it's impressive how unfazed Lex is here. He looks like he's in total control of the situation, and Superman is doing everything he predicted he would. Very Lex right here. This is good, I like it. Later on we get a scene of Lex playing Russian roulette with a random civilian that Superman befriended. This also feels very on brand for Lex Luthor. I could see him doing something like this in the comics, but what I can't get on board with though is Lex Luthor being legit surprised when the gun he's using goes off on the second shot and spoils his efforts to interrogate Superman further. That feels distinctly unlike Lex Luthor. You know what also feels distinctly un-Lex Luthor-like? His whole Machiavellian plan being undone by Eve Tessmacher's selfies. I know she was capturing these pictures with a plan to expose Lex later on, but the fact that she was able to gather such obviously incriminating evidence in selfie pictures makes him look like such an incompetent villain. This is a shameless plug, but Michael Cudliss did such a good job with Lex I made a video about it. You should check it out. Of course, Lex being ragdolled all over the shop by Crypto at the end doesn't do much for his image as Superman's big bad either. I banged on this drum before and I'm going to keep banging on it. When you do something like this to a villain, it's very hard to later on get him over as a truly intimidating character that the audience will respect. This just makes it hard for the audience ever to see this guy as anything other than a joke. What I'm trying to say is, just stop punking out your villains. There's some villains you can absolutely do this to, and there's some you should never do this to, and Lex Luthor is at the top of that list. Some villains demand your respect. For the characters to work, they need to be respected. Dr. Doom is one of these characters. Magneto is another, and yes, Lex Luthor too. He's in the same league as those guys. I'm not exactly hyped about where this ending leaves Luthor going forward either. Lex is exposed right at the end of his first appearance. Maybe I'm drawing too many comparisons to other iterations of Lex Luthor here, but Superman in STAS isn't able to pin a single crime on Lex Luthor for a lot of that show, because Lex is just that calculating. He's that smart that none of his crimes could ever be directly tied back to him. In fact, Lex doesn't see the inside of a jail cell until Justice League. Something like this is what I was hoping for here. Seeing Lex Luthor hide behind his lawyers for years before Superman would eventually be able to bring him down. Just feels like Lex has already been toppled as Superman's biggest threat already. He's been exposed to the public as a really bad guy. It's kind of hard to come back from that. But what do I know, maybe Gunn is setting up something similar to Lex's arc in All-Star Superman. And that could work. And if that is the direction that Gunn has planned for Lex, and All-Star is his inspiration, then please adapt these scenes. These two scenes could go a long way to pump up this Lex Luthor in my eyes and actually give him some menace. A lot of my criticisms on this version of Lex Luthor come down to my own personal preference. Nicholas Hoult turns in a good performance. He's a good actor. But like I said, my issue isn't with the performance or the actor. It's the characterization. I'm just not the biggest fan of it. I've mentioned it before on this channel, but I can get pretty precious about changes to a character's origin story. Small changes I can forgive, sure. I'm not one of these comic fans that thinks you should never do anything different from what's in the comics. But bigger changes, especially ones that recontextualize a character's motivations, those ones kind of stick in my craw a little bit. The origin story of Superman, two kindly scientists sending their son to Earth to escape their doomed planet, is one of the best origin stories as far as I'm concerned in fiction. It's so simple, but so effective. Gunn makes a pretty big change to Superman's origin here. Jor-El and Laura aren't kindly scientists. They're monsters. They want Clark to basically rule over Earth, and also I guess take a harem of women. At first I was pretty conflicted about this change. I mean, I'm a guy who loves the Donner Superman films, and that speech from Marlon Brando's Jor-El about how he wants his son to be a bright light for humanity, how he wants Kal to raise humanity up and to become the light for them to follow, to become great, is one that's always stuck with me. So much so, in fact, I remember seeing that first trailer for Superman Returns and hearing that speech narrated over it with the John Williams score playing in the background, and it really hit me in the feels, man. I don't know what to tell you. Even today, I go back to that trailer just to hear those lines. There's just something so beautiful about Jor-El's message to his son in that first Donner Superman film. It's so honest and earnest and hopeful. It's very Superman. So needless to say, yeah, I was pretty conflicted about Gunn changing Jor-El and Laura from kindly scientists who wanted to save their son into monsters. But in the context of this film, for this iteration of Superman, I actually think this change really works. Clark in the comics has always had a strong family bond with the Kents, and an idealistic view of his biological alien parents. But here Gunn has stripped it down so that Clark only has the strong familial bond with the Kents at the end. It's almost as if Clark has forsaken his Kryptonian heritage in favor of his adopted family. As if Clark sees himself as 100% human at the end. That's really touching. And again, it underlines just how human Clark is in this iteration. And speaking of that ending, Clark watching footage of the Kents in the Fortress of Solitude, man, that hit different. This film had a lot of hard-hitting emotional scenes for me, but that one choked me up a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. Superman, it's a great film, and it's one of those films that feels legitimately heartfelt, made by a director who has a lot of love for this character. It's nice to see Superman in the hands of someone who truly understands him. You know, I've waited 12 years for a Superman movie to give me a version of Superman I can actually recognize on the big screen. Isn't that so sad to say that it's taken 12 years for Warner Brothers to finally get their act together and put a guy in the director's chair who actually understands this character? As a first entry in the new DC cinematic universe, this film 100% gets me invested in what Gunn is cooking up. If Gunn keeps this level of quality, and really gives the next few films this same sense of heart and sincerity that Superman has here, then I can for sure see DC on film coming back and becoming a massive contender. Anyway, Superman, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Make sure to angrily disagree with me down there. Or, you know, maybe say something nice too, that's always welcome. Maybe hit the like button too, you know, if you liked the video. Or if you really want to go above and beyond, maybe hit subscribe and that notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching.